Good evening, Maz. Nice to see you. All right. I'm sorry that this reporting that you're doing in such a lonely way. You're breaking these big stories, and I think because they're so uncomfortable for so many people in the media, there's just not a lot of coverage to it. And then at the same time, Donald Trump has instructed his movement to ignore the Jeffrey Epstein files. So the people who did have a lot of interest in it, many of them now suddenly don't. I've had this experience before as a journalist where you're breaking stories that you know are important, but for a lot of political reasons, for a lot of other reasons, people just don't want to pay attention to them. The corporate media is incentivized not to cover them because they didn't break them, because of professional jealousy, or because it's a topic they are uncomfortable with, as is the case for you. Before we get into some of the specifics, just talk about what this experience has been like of working on this story that for so long everybody said was the most important story, breaking major parts of it and having almost nobody, certainly in corporate media, even talk about it.
Sure, yeah. And thanks to you, Glenn, for paying attention to it, because as you mentioned, there's been a, like, I won't say calculated, but perhaps calculated attempt to, ignore it or to, not pay attention to it in some way that suppresses it. But, anyways, we started reporting these documents a few months ago. And, this is not privileged information. For those who haven't read the stories, they're based on a couple of sets of leaked emails from Epstein himself, but also former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who, Glenn, as you mentioned, he was a very, very close friend and associate of Epstein during his life. And they're posted on a website called Distributed Denial of Secrets, which is kind of like a successor website to WikiLeaks. And they've been there for some time. So we've been reporting based on that archive and then corroborating some of that archive with the bits and pieces that the Epstein estate has released through this process with the government, disclosure of the so-called Epstein files. So that's kind of what we've been reporting on. So it's not something we have that others don't have. They could report on it. They're just choosing not to. But I did think that after the first few stories we did, where we reported on Epstein's ties or his involvement in negotiating a security deal in Mongolia for Israel, doing another deal like that with Cote d'Ivoire, including doing talks during the time when Barak was still formerly defense minister. He helped organize a back-channel negotiation during the Syrian civil war between the Israeli government and the Russian government to find and negotiate solution to the removal of Syrian President Bashar Assad. He also had an Israeli spy, a very lifelong Israeli intelligence operative, a senior operative for military intelligence, who lived at his house in New York for extended times, as per his own schedules and his emails as well, too, while wiring him money. So, this huge drumbeat of stories, I figured at some point it would trigger these institutions and force them to look into this, to devote resources to this, to cover it. To date, that has not happened. And, I will say Dropsite, I think we punch above our weight, but it's only like 7 or 8 of us. And we operate on Substack with small donations. We're all professionals, but we're not a huge team. It's not the New York Times, the Washington Post. We can't devote millions of dollars to digging up things and so forth. We're operating what we have. And we're the only ones, as he said, doing the reporting. And it is somewhat complex. You do need to put together the timelines and the emails and so forth, but certainly not insurmountable for a major institution. So it's interesting. And I will say one thing, that throughout the time we've been reporting the story, the New York Times and others have been covering Epstein. But they've been covering things that we already know about, his involvement in sex abuse in the early 2000s in Florida, talking about things that are already public knowledge ad nauseum and doing these kind of nothing burger stories effectively. Some of the stories have been okay, and the Wall Street Journal and others have revealed some things which are interesting. But a lot of the reporting has been so inconsequential, and it gives an appearance that they're covering this important subject because they're devoting resources to it. There's almost a daily drumbeat of op-eds or whatever about Epstein. But no one is going a step further to talk about what I think is at this point more consequential, which is his role in global politics, his ties to foreign countries and foreign intelligence agencies, including, in Israel, Russia, England, and in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And that's what our reporting has been about, and it's going to continue to be about in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that one of the reasons why the corporate media is avoiding this part, and you're right, they've done a lot of reporting on things people already know about, almost designed to almost obfuscate how deep this really went, in the sense that it'll go into extreme detail about all the different victims of Jeffrey Epstein, really nailing down the fact that he himself was a serial sex abuser, which A, everybody already knows, and B, really doesn't matter since he's dead. And the implications of the story that made it important have always been who else was involved and to what extent, and where did he get his money from and things like that. There's been some reporting on that, but I do think a big part of it is the fact that ties to Israeli intelligence or involvement in U.S. foreign policy always are kind of the third rail for American corporate media. Like, that is just too explosive to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and his ties to Israeli foreign policy apparatus. But I do want to, before we get into the specifics of the most recent stories, I just want to drill down a little bit more on this media angle. A lot of people don't remember this. I was reporting on WikiLeaks like almost from the very beginning. I remember the first time I ever read about WikiLeaks. It was like one of their very first leaks, like way before the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs that put them on the map. And at the time, the method they would use was they would receive information from some source inside an institution that would give it to them, or someone who hacked information and would give it to them, and they would put it on their website. A very different model than they ended up using once everybody knew who WikiLeaks was, where they would partner with media outlets that they chose, or they would publish it themselves in like a very dramatic way. At the beginning, they were doing what this other site was doing that you've been using, which is they would get something and they would just put it up on the internet for everybody. Anyone could see it. It wasn't a scoop. It was just there for journalists to go and look at and report on. And one of the things they quickly discovered, and it's the reason why they abandoned this, is there's this kind of mindset in journalism that if something's not exclusive to you, if you're not the only one who has a story, if anybody can just go to this website and see these materials, then it's really not worth your time to report it, because you're not really going to get credit for it. You're not going to be the one who breaks the story. And that was the reason why WikiLeaks realized that no matter how important the materials are that they just throw up on the internet, they're not going to have any attention paid to them unless they give media outlets this material, access to it on an exclusive basis, or WikiLeaks itself treats it that way. Do you think that, the materials that you're using, as you say, are not secret? It's not like only you have them. I think you have some that might be exclusive to you, but the bulk of the material you've been using to doing this reporting is right there on the site. I've gone there to that site. Everyone can go on that site. That's where the dump is of the hacked emails they got from Barack. Is that part of why you think the corporate media just isn't interested, because it's just not theirs?
I think that's part of it. I think that there's a sense that it does have that dynamic you're referring to, whereby if one were to single out a particular reporter and give them a scoop and sell them on it a little bit, it can pique their interest a bit more. And Glenn, as you know, there's like this weird clubby sort of culture in journalism, which you also experienced during the Snowden times, and I witnessed as well too, that they have like a certain cultural, characteristics that they'll ignore certain things which are newsworthy because of personalistic reasons like this, or careeristic reasons. That is a thing which exists. Having said that, I think in this case it's a little weird, because we've been told for so long, and they actually got the public to buy into this, that the Epstein files and Epstein's activities were an issue of primary and overriding public interest. And I think there's good reason to feel that as well, too. So in such a circumstance, one would imagine that would override, any sort of sense that it should have given me as a leak first, or it's already out there and so forth, because there's a great hunger for this information. Even the federal government shutdown was seemingly prolonged to prevent people from learning more about this. So I do kind of suspect that a lot of the reason in this case is actually political, because even if this information were publicly on a site like a DDoS, and if you change some variables here and you said that, and it wasn't an Israeli intelligence officer living in Epstein's house, it was actually an FSB officer, I have to imagine that a lot of political figures would be pushing for more scrutiny of that. The press would feel more enthusiastic or more willing to cover it in that angle. And it seems to be for some reason this particular variable has changed their willingness, or it's, narrowed down the Venn diagram of people who have the willingness and the ability to report on it, because their stories are a little bit complicated. You have to put together this chain of correspondence. You have to download these huge files. So I get it. Some people maybe deterred by that, but institutions certainly should not be. But I do think that there's this political angle. And I will say one last thing, though. At the Dealbook Summit, the NYT Summit that happened recently, Ehud Barak was present. And Nicholas Kristof, who's a columnist at the New York Times, he actually brought up and referenced our story about Yoni Koren, the Israeli military intelligence officer who was staying at Epstein's house, Epstein's apartment, I should say, because Koren was actually Barak's chief of staff. So Kristof referenced the story, he clearly read it, and he thought it was credible enough to bring up to Barak. But instead of asking him, which I would have asked him about, does this indicate that Epstein had intelligence ties, he asked Barak another question, which is also important, but, kind of the answer is predictable, whether he had been involved in Epstein's sex trafficking. So that speaks to me that, people are reading the story. They are aware.
Oh my God, Maz, I'm dying to know. I'm so in suspense. What did Barak say in response to that pressing question by Nicholas Kristof? Did he say, yes, I absolutely was heavily involved in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking? Or did he say, no, I had no idea that it was taking place? Well, I'm so in suspense to know what he said to this really probing question.
Well, of course, he treated it like he was in the Catholic confession booth.
Oh.
He usually came clean, and that it was a very moving moment.
Exactly. It's hard to lie to Nick Kristof. Let me start with a simple idea that is rarely acknowledged out loud, because you have to be very brave to acknowledge this out loud, and a lot of people just simply aren't. Your financial life is only as stable as the institutions you're told to trust. And these institutions have a long record of getting the big things wrong. People are told the system is sound. The evidence tells a different story. Inflation has eaten savings for years. Debt keeps hitting levels that were once unthinkable, and gold and silver have shattered record after record because investors are no longer willing to bet their future on political promises. These are not speculative spikes. They are signals. Signals that confidence in the system is fading, signals that many analysts believe carry straight into 2026. So the question becomes obvious. If the institutions with the most access and the most information are diversifying into real assets that cannot be printed or controlled, why should ordinary savers be the only ones left exposed? Golden Crest Metals created a clear, straightforward guide that shows how to add physical gold and silver to an IRA or 401k tax and penalty-free. No fear, no hype, just information that puts the choice back in your hands instead of the hands of centralized financial power. You can request it by calling 888-614-7120 or visit goldencrestmetals.com. Again, 888-614-7120. In times like this, the independent decision-making is not optimal. It is essential. One last time, 888-614-7120 or visit goldencrestmetals.com to get your free, no obligation info guide. All right. Let me ask you about a couple of these stories. So here's one from, actually, this is from yesterday at Dropsite News. And if we can put that on the screen, the headline is Ask Jeffrey. Epstein ran Les Wexner's pro-Israel philanthropy machine. Emails reveal the Wexner Foundation has long claimed Epstein, quote, did not make decisions regarding the use of the foundation's funds. New emails show that is flagrantly false. Now, just to give a little background to that for people who don't know, one of the big mysteries of Jeffrey Epstein's life was how is it that he accumulated the vast wealth that he clearly possessed? I mean, he wasn't just, a wealthy guy. He was he was like not quite, maybe not a billionaire, but living life like a billionaire, like hundreds of millions of dollars of net worth, multiple huge mansions, the private island, the private jet. This is, a kind of wealth that exceptionally few people have on the planet. It was unclear where he got that from. And it turns out one of the people who was his primary benefactor was Les Wexner, who's a billionaire who I think created Victoria's Secrets and a couple others. The other big benefactor was Leon Black. And when this question of Israel would arise and his connection to it, I would always look at Les Wexner's and Leon Black's, but let's focus on Les Wexner's charitable or philanthropic activities, because almost all of it was about Israel. Almost like his entire life cause, like so many Jewish billionaires in the United States, was Israel. And so here Jeffrey Epstein is right at his side, being enriched from him. And so, it was just another kind of piece of evidence suggesting strongly that Jeffrey Epstein's ties to Israel were quite substantial. But you were able to take that further and actually prove that Jeffrey Epstein was heavily involved in those pro-Israel philanthropic activities. What is it that you discovered?
Yeah, so first thing I'll say is that these emails are actually based on a different archive. They are posted on DDoS now, but they come from an archive that a hacker gave to Bloomberg News some months ago. And Bloomberg has been reporting on other aspects of the archive, but they haven't reported on this particular subject that we reported on. So these emails show they're between roughly 2005, 2008. They show that contrary to what the foundation had claimed, the Wexner Foundation, which is, as you mentioned, this very prolific donor to pro-Israel causes in the U.S., they had claimed that Epstein, who was the trustee of the foundation, was like an absentee trustee, and he had no meaningful role in its foundation's operations or its finances. They commissioned an internal review by outside lawyers to sort of commission a review to confirm that. So the emails show that that is not true, and I don't know if they were deceived themselves or they deceived somebody else, but the emails show that he was not only involved, he was treated as the final authority in many cases for major financial transactions, transfers of funds, decisions to transfer grants and so forth, tax issues, management of the finances of the funds themselves, stock trades and things like that. So, the idea he was not involved, it seems like is the opposite, in fact. It seems like he was so heavily involved that everyone was treating him as the last word. And this is kind of what our story is about. But one thing that we also talked about is the history of the Wexner Foundation and the Wexner family, because it's not even that this is just this individual who was interested in Israel. Wexner's wife is actually his father-in-law, his wife's father, was one of the founding members of the commanders of the Haganah, which actually created the state of Israel many decades ago. And when he died, he actually asked that people would give money not to any other cause or to him or his family, but to the Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces. So it was a very particularly hyper-political family focused on Israel specifically. And that was kind of what the foundation is for. And the foundation, I'll say very briefly, did a lot of things. They gave $128 million just in the 15-year period to Israeli causes in America. They would fund these very lucrative scholarships for Israeli public officials to come stay at Harvard and study at Harvard and be immersed in Harvard. And that went on for a very long time until the October 7, 2003 terrorist attacks of Hamas and the subsequent Israeli invasion of the Gaza Strip. And then they pulled it out because they thought that Harvard had not cracked down hard enough on people protesting the subsequent genocide in Gaza. So that continued for a long time, though. It really shaped Harvard and really shaped a lot of American institutions. It also made Epstein himself very powerful at Harvard because he had an office there. He had a lot of power at Harvard, and it was through his stewardship of not just the Wexner fortune, but the Wexner Foundation itself. So that's kind of what our story is talking about, and it's something which no one else has really discussed, but it's really as clear as day in his own private communications.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.